Hi, I'm Bob McLeod. I'm an artist for Marvel and DC Comics, and I'm going to do a drawing of Spider-Man for you. So when I start out very loosely and just kind of try to find my way, what do I want to do with the character. So with Spider-Man, I kind of like to have him in spidery type poses. So I have him crawling. So when I'm starting out, I'm really just thinking of where I'm going to put his arms and legs, what I'm going to have him doing, more than how well I'm drawing him. I mean, I'm trying to think of proportions, but part of the reason I draw so lightly and loosely is so that if I do want to do something different than what I start out with, I haven't spent a half hour doing something that I'm going to erase. And then at this point, I start thinking about where the actual muscles go and trying to refine the drawing. And I'm lucky that since I was 5 years old, pretty much, I could draw lightly. So it's easier to erase and correct my drawings. Spider-Man actually was the character that Marvel would always start new artists on because they figured he was such a good character they couldn't screw him up. So my very first penciling job was a Spider-Man job, Marvel Team Up number 86. And I like drawing Spider-Man because he gets in unusual poses that other characters don't get in. So one thing we do with superheroes is we tend to draw bigger shoulders and smaller triceps. If you look at bodybuilders, the tricep is sometimes twice as big as the shoulder, but that just doesn't look as attractive. So we tend to make the shoulders bigger. I think of figure drawing as like putting a puzzle together. Every muscle fits in a certain place, every bone fits in a certain place. And so when I'm drawing the figure, I'm just putting a puzzle together. So I know that the fingers have to come out of these certain places in the palm. And a lot of this is up in my head, but I'm thinking, actually thinking of like he's made out of glass so that I see that his leg goes right through his arm and attaches up here to his hip and everything, even if I may not draw that. I got no advice from anybody ever, pretty much. I was desperate for people to help me learn how to do this stuff, and just couldn't find anybody. Even in art school, I never really had a teacher that I loved that would really teach me what I was looking to learn. So I ended up quitting school and just teaching myself. I was working up at Neal Adams studio starting out, and the only advice Neal ever gave me was slow down. Sometimes, just because I've drawn Spider-Man 1,000 times, I'll start with the costume ahead of time. So there's no set way to do it. And you'll see he's got this webbing under his arms, and we don't do that anymore. Or at least most artists don't. But knowing where all the muscles is really helps because, like I said, it's a puzzle you're putting together. So if you know that the shoulder muscle, the deltoid, starts up here and attaches to the collarbone, and then it comes over here and kind of wraps around and between the tricep and the bicep, you're putting puzzle pieces together, and it helps you with your figure drawing. You can leave Spider-Man's costume open, or you can add blacks to it. I like to add black to his costume. So sometimes I'll do that totally in the ink. Sometimes I'll kind of decide ahead of time whether I'm going to do a little highlight on the bottom, reflected light hitting the bottom, or if I just make the black go all the way to the bottom. So many decisions you got to make when you're drawing that have nothing to do with how well you can draw. And then for his webbing, everything radiates out from the center of his face. So Todd McFarlane would do many lines in his costume. I'm more the John Romita way of doing his costume. So there's fewer lines and they're in more defined places. So just doing feathering. So there's different ways to do rendering lines. You can kind of pull them toward your hand, or you can push them away. This brush would actually work well to do the kind of inking that Bernie Wrightson is known for, long strokes, and he got them kind of from Frank Frazetta. But it's not as good for the little strokes. Also, my eyes aren't what they used to be, so a lot of times when I ink now, I just take my glasses off because I can see more clearly. Yeah, now I'm getting the hang of this brush. It takes a little practice. Every brush you use is a little different, and I've worked most of my career with a Winsor Newton Series 7, number 2, sometimes number 3. Actually, I guess most of the time a number 3. Russ Heath would ink with a number 4. You can get just as fine a line with the big brushes and they just hold more ink. So inking styles have really changed. I learned how to do all of this stuff that's totally just kind of gone out of fashion now since the digital age has come in. Like placing blacks and where to do rendering and what kind of rendering. So what we did in the early days was figure out how to make a transition from white to black in a certain way. And now because we were working with flat colors, and so there was no gradation in the color, so you had to do everything with the brush or with the pen in the ink. So ever since I was a little kid, I've been fascinated by black ink on white paper and what you can do with it. I never wanted to be a fine artist. I always wanted to be a cartoonist. I just liked lines. So this part of the webbing is a tricky part because it's easy to go past these lines or before them. So to hit the line at the bottom of the curve takes a little concentration. And see, I just missed it right there. So you can look for that when you read your next Spider-Man comic to see where they missed the line on the webbing. So I have a tendency to flip the drawing around a lot. I don't need to, but I'm more comfortable doing certain things from a certain angle. I was watching somebody, I forget who it was at a convention, never moved his paper. I mean, for one thing, I'm drawing Spider-Man kind of upside down. We're used to seeing a figure with the head at the top and the feet at the bottom. So some things just in your head are easier for you to picture if you're right side up. Also, when I was learning how to ink, in the old days, people respected you more if you did every line with a brush, because brush is a little tougher to master than a pen. So the best inkers, Frank Giacoia, Dick Giordano, I mean, going back to Hal Foster, would just do everything with a brush. So I learned how to do everything with a brush. About the time I mastered that, nobody cared anymore. Everybody was just doing whatever was easiest. So the pencils are a guide. They're not a straitjacket. Mike Esposito taught me that when you fill in blacks, you should always have the point toward the edge of the black. So I've got to fill in this space here. I shouldn't have the back of the brush up against here because it's too easy to go over this line. So there's kind of different methods of inking. There's what I call the Dick Giordano method, where when you do a line like this, he would always weight the bottom of the curve. So thick down here and thin up here. And then there's the Joe Sinnott way, where the weight is in the middle of the curve. And I studied more Neal Adams, who does a little of both. All right, so I'm Bob McLeod, and here's my Spider-Man.